This is the YOB ConvoCast, one-on-one conversations with your other brothers' authors, community members, supporters, and friends.
What's up, friends, and welcome back to the YOB ConvoCast, conversations with folks in the Your Other Brothers community. My name is Tom. I'm the editor, co-founder of YOB, and so excited because on the heels of one new person, we have another new person making a podcast debut. And he's great. He's been in our community since the beginning of this year, I think, a few months, maybe going to last year. I don't know. We'll get some details on him shortly. But we've gotten to meet him on Zoom a few times, and he's even written a book. And so we might talk about that a little bit today. But yeah, I'm just so excited to get to talk to him. Thrilled that he's coming on the podcast for just a second time in his podcast career, but ours for the first time. His name is Harrison. What's up, Harrison?
Hey, Tom. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you. Harrison Bly, author of Bent on Men. You know, we read your book however many months ago that was. I don't even remember. Do you remember when that was? They all run together for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what month that was. It recently, yeah.
Several months ago, a few months ago, yeah. And you did us the honors for the first time we've ever done this of coming onto our book club towards the end of our discussion and just letting us talk to you, ask you questions about your book. You were super open about everything, and you asked us questions as well. And it was just a really great time. I appreciate you doing that. I hope other authors will crash our book club sometime.
That'd be great.
Shout out to all the authors out there that we've read. We've been going for about almost 4 years now with the book club. So it's just so cool, and it's cool that you're part of our community as well. You've hopped on a couple Zoom calls since you joined, and it's always great when you're able to join us. Why don't you tell our audience who you are if they haven't read your book, if they don't know who you are, if they haven't met you inside the community yet? Just share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so my name's Harrison. And I grew up in the Midwest and struggled, like many of you listeners, with connecting the dots between my faith and my sexuality. And it wouldn't have been until really my college years until that came to a point. I wrestled with that through my college years, started to get some help for that. And the cool thing is, Your Other Brothers was one of those very few resources at the time that I looked up and came across, who knows, through late night Google searching. I don't remember exactly, but there was Your Other Brothers, a place to go and read about people in similar situations. What a lifeline that was. Mm. And so kind of had a radical shift in my thinking about who I was and that I was truly loved is a big theme in my story, coming to believe that and experience that and accept that. Partially as an act of faith, but of course, people really loving me. And giving me the space to explore, what do I really believe about myself? How do I really want to live? And then, made some decisions about how I would live, thinking I would maybe be a celibate Christian, side B. Then I met a woman and we got married, and now we have 3 kids. And my oldest is 10 and my youngest is 5. And so being a father and a husband is also a big part of who I am. And and then many years later, I decided I wanted to share about this experience. And so I wrote the book Bent on Men, partially, maybe mostly for myself. As a way to organize my thoughts and my story and to acknowledge how God had been working through it. And then here we are. Thanks for sharing that. We've had several married people on the show and come through the podcast studio, Metaphorical Doors, throughout the years.
But I'm trying to think, like off the top of my head, I'm sure we have, but I can't think it's a long list of fathers that we've had. Like we've had several married guys, but fathers is few and far between. And so I appreciate the perspective you lend, as being a member of our community, the few, the proud, the fathers. It's good to have that represented on the show here today. And this isn't like a book club rehash per se. But I did want to say, I just wanted to give you props that I really enjoyed your book. It was really, there's something special about it because like there are other great side B books out there, that focus explicitly on sexuality and focus pretty much on that. And that's a very important topic. Obviously, it's something that we cover quite exhaustively in this community, but there's something about your book that feels, I don't know what the word is, if it's like well-rounded or just like there's other dimensions to it as far as examining masculinity and relationship with your father. You mentioned that quite a bit, and relationship with other men and friendships and like learning to lean on them in healthy ways and see yourself as a man. Like, so there's a masculinity component to your book that I feel is often lacking or missing, or I wish there were more of in other books about sexuality and faith. And so if anyone's just curious about a book that focuses on those elements too, which is something that I love talking about in Your Other Brothers, then I definitely encourage people to check it out. I think it's just a solid book. Very vulnerable, very real. I give you props for your vulnerability.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to write something that had not been written yet, and be distinct. And what I hope to do was to share more about what it's like to deal with unwanted attractions, and what it's like in your body, what it's like in your inner thought life. Yeah, there's some great resources out there about theology and how to think about this stuff, and that is so important. And books about friendship, and your own book is actually very similar to mine. It's funny. I pulled up a document where I was comparing like what my books were like with others, and I just pulled that up recently in preparation for this, and I found your book in there, Struggle Central, and was comparing mine to yours, and trying to make sense of what I was trying to do that was different. So it was really interesting that there was a lot of similarities, but also some pretty unique things in our stories as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. I see a lot of similarities, focus on relationships and trying to figure out where I belong and fit into this world of masculinity and male relationships. I thought it would be just like cool for this conversation today. We've got 20 some minutes on the clock. I would love to, I don't know, just examine friendship and relationships, because I feel like that's such a thing that we're both passionate about and have written about. And so I guess, and I remember this coming up. I don't remember a whole lot from the book club, that you crashed and that you joined us for. But I remember there was a point where either someone asked you or you just started talking about feedback from your book. And someone saying something along the lines of like the relationships you had that you talk about in the book, like how can I find those types of people in my life? Because you talk about some friends that you really took some significant strides with, in your own self-development, but then also just building a friendship with them. And you can certainly fill in the dots as far as me telling this story goes. But I'm curious about the response to relationships you talked about in the book. Because a lot of people could read the book and either be super encouraged and inspired and blessed and be like, wow, look at this guy that struggled with this, and now he's met this person, and now there's like some kind of healing happen, and maybe he still struggles with certain things here and there, certainly, but this is obviously a very profound experience that he wrote about. And so people could either read about those experiences with other men and be very blessed and very encouraged, or they might read it and be like, well, that's great for him, but where the heck do I find that person in my life? Or will I ever find that person in my life? Or the end of that spectrum, I've just given up entirely on finding such a person like that in my life because I've tried so many times and they ain't nowhere to be found. So I'm curious how you reconcile that, because I'm sure you've gotten responses on both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the thing I hear the most in response to this is, it must be nice. In my book, I talk about a couple of guys who really moved towards me and my apprehension with that. These were men that didn't struggle with feeling gay or queer or anything like that. That, pretty normal, straight guys who were moving towards me and understood what I was going through only through what I could tell them, not through their own life experience, and my resistance to that. And a lot of guys are just longing for that. They want someone to move towards them, to be curious about them, to lift up the hood of the engine, so to speak. And a lot of men are hurting for that. They want that. They ache for it, and just can't seem to find a space where that seems safe or appropriate or anything like that. And so my heart goes out, to guys like this. But when I talk with those guys, I'm finding really similar things in my defense mechanisms that they have as well, where I think without realizing it, a lot of these guys are shutting down relationships and opportunities that they could be forming connection with other guys too soon, too early, because of fear, sometimes for really great reasons, that maybe this person isn't very safe. Maybe it's not okay to open up with them. But a lot of times it's the misinterpreting, misinterpreting the intentions of other men and thinking they don't love me. They couldn't possibly want to be with someone like me. And so you kind of self-sabotage and ruin the opportunities because, and some of this is like a victim mentality, wanting to be in control of your story. But, and then some people genuinely are victims. You open yourself up to somebody thinking they're safe, thinking they might love me anyway. And then they don't. They ghost you, they reject you, they're different around you. And that's what we always risk. But far too often, I see self-sabotage as the theme among these guys who read the book. And then I want to be honest, there's a third kind of response. So there's people who, backing up, there's people who are inspired and say, oh, maybe I could find people who love me. Maybe I could belong with other people that I never thought I could belong with. And then there's a second group who I've just described, who are jaded and can't imagine that there's a place to belong. And then there's a third group of people who really struggle with the book because they haven't grown up with that kind of shame around same-sex attraction. Maybe they've been fortunate to be in a family that communicated in their early years the kind of love that they would experience regardless. Or maybe they were part of a church where they could open up and process that, and it wasn't, belonging somewhere was not what was at stake for them. And I love that. When I hear that that's people's stories, I think that's where we need to get to. And I'm happy for them, but they'll read the book and find it off-putting because they feel like, am I supposed to feel ashamed that I experience these attractions? And if they read my book, they might think that they ought to, and that's not my intent. And that's a really fair criticism of the book. So those are the three kind of reactions I get to the book.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very neatly put out. I also remember something like profound, sad, realistic, this is just the way life is sometimes, that you mentioned some of the follow-up on some of those friendships that you wrote about and how they are today. And I remember you mentioning there's one guy, you don't see him that often, maybe a couple times a year. It's not like you're hanging out. I think you even said something along the lines of, it's not like you're hanging out naked all the time or something. It's not like you're having that experience on the daily or on the weekly or even on the monthly or on the quarterly. It's like, so I think it's helpful to get that, because it's easy to read a book or to watch a movie or watch a TV show and assume that when the credits roll and when the last page is turned, that the momentum continues. And sometimes maybe it does. Maybe for certain relationships or certain stories, the momentum does continues, but life is up and down and relationships wax and wane. And sometimes they get closer and sometimes they drift further. And sometimes geography's at play. And sometimes people get married or have kids, or sometimes, there's just like a million things that happen. And I can think in my own life when, even in my own, I've written 2 books, and I can think of one relationship in particular where there was one guy in the first book that I wrote about, and he was the first person to ever call me a leader. And it was such a strong, like, word of affirmation for this super passive, introverted, shame-ridden boy that I was and still am a lot of times. And he just was like such an influential person in my first book. And it's like hardly a few pages into the second book, and he is no longer in my life. And it is a brutal awakening of like this person that was so pivotal in book 1. And book 2, he disappears and he's no longer in my life. And, and that is life. People are in our lives and then they're out of our lives. And honestly, yeah, it's easy to get demoralized, and it's easy to just assume that it's not worth the effort anymore and just to give up. And I've been through seasons of my life where I'm giving up and I don't want to just put in the effort anymore because it's too hard. It's too hard to connect. It's too hard to maintain. I think that's a big one. It's just hard to like get that consistent rhythm going. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still trying to figure out how to maintain after that initial connection happens. Like how do you build a friendship with another man? Because I feel like this was stuff that I should have learned 20 years ago, and I'm trying to get there. I think I've learned a lot, but I'm still trying to get there.
Yeah. I can totally relate with you on that challenge. It is ongoing. You're absolutely right. There's some key characters in the book who my relationship with them, today is not what it was in the book. People change, and you got to make space for that. and so, yeah, I've sought new friendships. And I have relationships with some of those people still. They're just different. And not because of the book, but, for a variety of reasons, so they're just, people evolve, they change in important ways. And a huge aspect of friendship is walking through that with people over and over again. And so you kind of have to adapt and accept and love somebody for who they're becoming. But sometimes that means that they're not going to be the close, intimate friend that they once were. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about male friendship, because I think it's no secret, unless you've been living under a rock the last certainly 5 years, maybe 10, 15 years, but like this budding sense of loneliness. People might have heard the term loneliness epidemic. And I think it's just so fascinating to me because as it feels like it's a parallel course to social media and the smartphone, like these devices and these outlets that supposedly draw us together or theoretically could, and maybe in some instances have, but the trade-off has been like we're lonelier than we've ever been. And I would say, I mean, I have nothing scientific in front of me, so I'm pulling this out of my head, but I think it feels true. Like I think men are getting hit harder with this than women are. I think men are by and large feeling the loneliness epidemic more than women are, and I think that's for a lot of reasons that I think men struggle to put words together about relationships and the need for them and how to pursue them and how to build them. What's like your vantage point? Because you're in a different part of the country, slightly different part of the country than where I am right now, and different life experiences certainly, but like what's your vantage point on men and friendships in faith communities and churches, just in your day-to-day life? You're also a dad, and so that's an added talk about like it's the challenges of making friendships with other men. Like having a spouse is one thing, but having kids can also be another thing that can make it challenging. So yeah, I would just love your take on like how you see men and friendships today here in 2024.
I have more thoughts about friendship than there's enough time to unpack.
You have 30 seconds. No, you have take your time.
I can do that.
Take whatever you need.
In a nutshell, I think we, when I say we, I just mean stereotypically speaking about society in general, American Christianity in the West, very low view of friendship. And at the same time, most of the problems that we face as a society seem to somehow, when you connect the dots, come back to an issue around needing friendship. And so I think it is still dawning on our collective conscience the importance of friendship, but there is not yet space to pursue it the way our consciences want us to. And so I think that the imagination for what friendship, for the importance of it and how we can do it and how we can do it well, is still being formed in our collective conscience. But when I think about specifically between men among Christians, I think we still have a long way to go to embrace it as something that's really important. Not something as we could just say, oh yeah, that's important. That's like eating your vegetables, No, this is like vital. And serious things go wrong when men are not connected with one another in a deep and more colorful way than we've seen in these past some decades in the church in America. That's kind of a summary of what I think about male friendship. Yeah. What about you?
So to summarize male friendship more important than broccoli. Is that accurate?
Wow. I didn't know if I was going to be writing another book or not, but I'm just going to write that down. That's going to be the title
Please quote
of my
me.
next book. More important than broccoli.
Yeah, far more important than broccoli.
Far more.
Yeah. And I take it from me, folks. I love broccoli. It's one of my favorite vegetables. Especially you roast it, put some olive oil, drizzle some olive oil, some salt and pepper on that thing. Just roast it in the oven. That's the way to go. Yeah, I mean, so it's so interesting to me because for the longest time, and I still have to like wake myself up sometimes because I think for the longest time I was under the illusion and sometimes still feel as if I am that. Am I the only man that's like struggling with this? Like it feels like all the other men.
No.
Well, because it feels like I go to church or I go to, whatever arena where there's men and I just see men and they look well adjusted. They look happy. They have kids. They're married. They're single. They don't need the amount of love or friendship that it feels like I need. And so it feels like there's a dissonance where I recognize my need for friendship and male intimacy and having that circle of people that I can call on and go to. And my perception through the years has been that other men are just fine. They have their guys that they see once a year or twice a year. And it feels like from my vantage point that they're just fine with that. They don't need to see somebody on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or call them or hug them or, whatever, like have that level of connection. And what I'm learning in recent times, is that I think it's something that we're starting to wake up to, even here in Asheville where I live. I go to this weekly men's group that was started by a therapist, and it's a faith community, but it's kind of light on the faith, and that's not a negative sense. It's like we're really just real with each other, that we can get in a circle every week for 2 hours and just talk about what's going on in our lives. And if it means being angry, and if it means swearing, and if it means crying, and if it means being held or hugging, like there's room for a lot of expressions in the room that go beyond just like the fluffy Christianese response or answer at the that you might find elsewhere. So I'm recognizing, and these are all guys, like most of them are in their 30s, like I am. There's some older guys as well. It's like, it's something that I'm really thrilled to have found over the last year, about a year now I've been going. And so that's helped me wake up to the fact that, and they're all by and large straight men. And so there's this relief that I'm like, okay, maybe there are other men, and there are in fact other men that desire deeper connection with other men. And I've gone on a retreat with some of these guys. And so that's been a great development in my life. But like by and large, sometimes I get lulled into that sense that I'm like, man, all the other men that I look around at church or elsewhere, like it just feels like they're making do, they're fine. And I'm the one that has like the super needy. And then I get self-conscious because I feel like I'm so needy and I need all this attention and all this affirmation, and everyone else doesn't need it. And so I've had to walk that walk that line, I guess, through the years.
Yeah. Oh man. And emphatically, no, you're not the only one. And like, I've not yet met a man who's like, nah, I'm good. I really am good alone. And with this minimal view of friendship, take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
I've not, now I see plenty of guys who I might assume that about. But when you take the time to get to know them, you quickly learn that there's this deep dissatisfaction with the status quo on community for men and what there is on offer. And so I think those of us who struggle with our sexuality, we're unique in the sense that we're quicker to get to that place of desperation.
Yeah.
We're quicker to get to that place of, well, I know something's wrong with me. And I really need other guys. And we also are the folks maybe with some of the biggest obstacles to friendship because of the wounds, those who deal with abuse and trauma in their life and connect that to their sexual struggles. There are just some enormous obstacles to friendship that are baked in with that. But the need for it is universal, and that is worth tapping into when talking with these other guys. Now, when I try to relate to somebody and I don't know their story or their life or anything, and they seem like they've got it together, I'm approaching them, right? And they don't look like they want to give me the time of day. I just assume that's all a veneer. Like, it's fake. They're just projecting this because this is what they've learned to do. But underneath that, they want connection. And maybe they don't want me. That's fine. But they want connection. And I don't mind anymore being the person to move towards them, to learn about them, and to pull that mask down, and to discover that there's an opportunity for us to connect. We have so much in common. And so no, you're not the only one who thinks that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's my hope that, like, as, I'm hoping that this group that I'm in, that I go to here in Asheville, continues to grow, because we get some new guys that come every few weeks, every other month or so. And it's my hope that it's like people go through this phase, your social relationships, I feel like, are so baked into life and culture up through high school and college. And then after college, it's like this big, great, depending on what your job is, whatever your career is. And especially today, there's so much Zoom and remote jobs out there that are happening. And I just wonder, like, how men will wake up to that reality that, oh gosh, I need support. I need other people. And, hopefully they discover that earlier than their 30s, like a lot of guys are discovering it here in this group. But I hope you're right. I think you're onto something, though, that I think guys like us, I think we have to come to grips with this a lot quicker than the general population, and realizing our need for same-sex love and same-sex connection. And maybe it's a longer haul for other guys to wake up to that. Maybe that's for sure a thing. I feel like there's so many directions we could go with the conversation as far as connecting with straight men. I mean, that's a big conversation all in itself. Connecting with other gay or same-sex attracted men, that's a conversation in and of itself. I was curious in your life, because you talk about all these straight men in your book, like, do you have other gay men or same-sex attracted men, other side B people that you would consider close friends in your life? Or is that a largely untapped field for you? I was curious about that, just to kind of tie a bow on this part of the conversation.
Yes, I'm so glad you segued to this. And I actually have more questions for you about this than I would have anything. Yeah, I think there's some stuff to be explored around the relationships between men who experience same-sex attractions and men who don't. And what could those relationships be like? And what about those between men who experience same-sex attractions or who would identify as gay? And in my assumption, up until I released the book, I had a way of thinking about this that respected my marriage and my views on how I was growing. And that's just me and my story. And I'm learning that there are many other ways to grow and many other ways of thinking about this. And so to summarize how I have thought about this up until now, I have typically avoided relationships with other guys who experience same-sex attraction for two reasons. One, for safety. If I truly believe that sex with other men is not God's blessing or ordered for me in my life, then connecting closely with another man who is sexually interested in me as I might be sexually interested in him poses an implicit possibility that I would just love to not have on the table to begin with. As a way of temptation, this is something I'm struggling with. And so if I can keep a boundary there, now that doesn't mean I don't, that doesn't mean I shun or like, oh, here's somebody that's struggling like me, I'm just going to not talk to them ever. It just means there's some boundaries in place. I will relate to this person differently than maybe a brother in my church who doesn't struggle with this. And part of that came into place when I got married as a reassurance to my wife that when I'm going out and hanging out with a friend or a group of friends, that she has some idea of my boundaries and what to expect and how I'm relating to these guys in different ways. And I think different guys draw these lines in different places. But what's so fascinating to me, and that has worked for me, that has served me well. But the criticism about that, and I want to know if you identify with this criticism or not, is a sort of like, it assumes that men who struggle with this are somehow implicitly dangerous. Like, that we're all like freaks and we're going to tempt one another into dangerous situations. And it just kind of assumes that we're even worse off than we could have thought.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you identify with that critique?
This is a big one because I think, I've been in this world now, this internet sexuality world, whatever this world is, because it's gone by many iterations of, it wasn't always called the side B world. It was called other things like 15, 20 years ago. But yeah, like, cause I've been there, I've been through places where I entered into friendships with people and I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know the conversations I were having were appropriate or not appropriate, or interactions with these people were appropriate, not appropriate. And nothing that was so like heinously awful, like nothing like that comes to mind, but learning boundaries and learning maturity, and this comes with being 21, 22 anyway, and having to learn boundaries and learning maturity and mature relationships. So I give myself some credit there that like I used to be younger and I had to know things that I didn't know. And so, but just like learning, I think a big one for me and what I would say to people listening is like the concept of cuddling comes up in our community a lot. Like, how can two men express physical touch in a safe way that isn't just a pat on the back or just like a quick, half-second hug, just a quick like, all right, we're touching, but now we're not touching, and now let's separate. Is there a way to have meaningful, longer lasting touch that isn't inappropriate? And I think what I've had to learn is sometimes I've had that, and I think it has been. And it's not to say that arousal wasn't there or that distracting thoughts may have not been there, but there was more of an appreciation, a love for the other person that prevented any sort of crossing into inappropriate territory as far as taking touch in a wrong direction goes. So I have had that, but I've also had relationships, friendships where it felt like the level of touch wasn't meeting like the level of relationship. Like we weren't really close. We didn't really like know each other that well, or we didn't know like where like our hopes and dreams and fears are and what we struggle with or what we've gone through together. Like, and there was a level of touch being expressed that, because we have a common sexuality or because we have common woundings or common desires for touch, just to use that as a very specific example. Like there were plenty of times, not a bunch, but at least one or two times where that it felt like there was an imbalance there where the level of touch wasn't meeting the level of relationship. And so I would make that like my biggest takeaway to have a quick conversation about this is like whenever you're navigating friendships with other men, either in the YOB community or in this greater side B, same-sex attracted, gay, queer, bi community, like being able to recognize that difference between where you want to take the relationship, but also recognizing where it is and just kind of being a good steward of touch as one example, but just taking that to other things too, as far as like your conversations or the experiences that you share together, and just kind of asking yourself, being self-aware, like, is the relationship where the expression of the relationship is there an imbalance or a discrepancy there? Because I've had to learn over the years, of just making sure those are in line as best as I can keep them in line. And it can be challenging. It can be a dance to try to determine that.
I appreciate that you are presenting it as this complex thing. It's not so simple.
Right.
You can experience touch from another guy struggling with the same kind of issues you're struggling with. And you're saying it can be really healing. It can really meet a need that we all have. But it can also sort of be like, well, we don't actually know each other in this way or care. I appreciate that it can, for you, it sounds like it can go both ways, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think this is where we really have to tap into the Holy Spirit and listen to him and pay attention to what he's saying, because there's not some book out there that's going to help us through this. There's not a speaker or a thought leader right now, in my opinion, that's really nailing it around this issue. I wish there was, that would bring some black and white clarity to all of this. And so, we do have the Holy Spirit to guide us through these interactions, and we can go to him and be like, what would you have me do here? Because God knows our need for touch and blesses it. And he knows our need for friendship and to be known. And so it's not like he's unaware. And so we can go to him to get that kind of wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, I always think someday I'm going to arrive and know this and figure this out. Cause I will say,
please do.
There was a period of my life where, kind of like you said earlier, like there was part of me that just wanted to write off or just like stay away from close friendships with other queer men, because there's too many landmines and too many things to figure out and make, not even just like sexual inappropriate things, but just emotional boundaries and getting enmeshed and getting too dependent on people and just like all of that stuff. And so there have been times in my life where I like write those relationships off and kind of keep it more of a distance and try to funnel those energies into building relationships with straight men, because those challenges aren't necessarily in place with them. But then bonding with straight men has its own challenges, comes with its own things. Yeah. And so it's like, you pick your poison. There's, you try to connect with any human at all. I'm not even talking about women yet, but you talk about any human out there, you try to build a relationship with them. And there's going to be something that's going to be challenging if you're going to try to build a meaningful relationship with them. Like you're going to have struggles of connecting with communication or touch or experiences or priorities and regularity and dynamic. Yeah, there's going to be constant challenges. And so I'm trying to find my way back to the middle, like relationships with all people, as if they're great humans. And hopefully if they think I'm a great human, like I would love to connect more and just figure that out. Instead of writing people off. Because there have been times in my life where I wrote off straight men. There have been times in my life where I wrote off queer men, and I'm trying to not do that. with easier said than done sometimes, but I'm trying my best.
Yeah, that's admirable. I like that.
Well, Harrison, I feel like this is kind of what I thought coming into this conversation, even though you're a first-time guest, and you never really know how a first-time guest is going to do. But I had this feeling just from our previous Zoom calls that we've done that we would have a good conversation. And here we are at the end. I feel like I could have kept going, but alas, here we are. And I just feel like it's an opportunity for you to come back and share more. I hope you take me up on that.
I will. And I just want to thank you and praise you for the work that you have been doing. I recently reread some of the stories of your life and growing up and what you've been through. And it just strikes me. I just want to affirm your masculinity. When I see guys stepping out there into unknown territory and making space for other men to come with me. Come here and find a home with me, and let's navigate this life together. To me, is so masculine. It's so beautiful, and it's holy, and it's good. And I just want to thank you for doing that. You could have done something completely different with your life. It could have gone a million different directions. But the fact that you've built this community to welcome people who don't have it all figured out, the gypsies, as you might call them in your book,
yes.
who are wandering and confused and hurting. This is the church, and you are a huge key to building it. And I just want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you, brother. I receive that. I accept that. Thank you. It's been a journey, I will say, but having other people that have a similar heart and vision, like, it's been so reassuring over the years, almost a decade now, to have other sparrows here in the nest flying with me. It's been great. And thank you for joining us and just for your support and being with us for these last few months. It's been great to have you along and see you. I hope we have more opportunities to connect, and hope to meet you in person someday. I hope time will allow that.
Someday.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, feel free to respond to this episode if you have any thoughts, if you have any comments. Head over to our podcast episode page, yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Check out Harrison's ConvoCast episode there, and drop us a line, drop us a comment, drop us a question. If you've read his book, if you have any thoughts about the book, maybe you could write that in there. Thoughts on the loneliness epidemic, being a man, building friendship. Like, what's your vantage point? What's your outlook for the men around you in your church, in your faith community, in your generation? I'm curious, like, what some stories are that are out there. So I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on any or all of that. And this has been great. I really do hope you will be back, brother. It's great talking to you again. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, y'all. Until we cast our next convo, see y'all later.
It's completely surreal to me to be doing this. So I'm honored, flattered, all those things.
Yeah.
And here you are. I'm not just watching you on a video. You're interacting with me. My goodness.
Yeah, we are. This is real real stuff for podcasts. Because have you ever done one, or is this your first one that you've ever done?
I did one with Drew Boa with Husband Material.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But it was like 2 years ago, and I've not done one since. So this is my second ever podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is cool because that one felt different to me because I was a part of the Husband Material community. And so it felt like, all right, I know all the people listening to this. Mm-hmm. It felt more internal. Whereas this is cool because you guys, like I've shared before, are like a resource that I referenced, when I was exploring my faith mm-hmm. and what to do with myself. And so it feels different because it's like, I never imagined I'd be a part of what you're doing. So,
well, I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad you're here once again.